What if the moment you finally succeed is the moment you begin to fall apart? They say history remembers winners, but it rarely asks what happens to a man after he wins. Winston Churchill led a nation through one of its darkest hours. The world watched him stand unshaken while bombs rained from the sky. He gave speeches that lifted a broken people, but what they didn't see was what waited for him when the applause faded. A quiet room, a heavy silence, and something he called the Black Dog. This story isn't just about Churchill. It's about the man who wins the war everyone else can see, but still loses the one inside himself. It's about the nights that feel like failure even after the world calls you a success. Maybe it's your story too, so sit with me a while. This is not a story of defeat. It's a story of weight, of emptiness, of strange victory, and maybe, just maybe, of hope. He stood before Parliament, voice full of gravel and grit, his words charging into the silence like soldiers across no man's land. "We shall fight on the beaches," he said, and the room held its breath. "We shall never surrender." It was 1940, and Winston Churchill had become the voice of resistance, the iron backbone of a nation on the edge of ruin. They called him a lion. But few people knew that this lion often curled into himself in the dead of night, growling not at enemies abroad, but at shadows inside his own chest. He called it the Black Dog. That was his name for the depression that stalked him for most of his life. It was a clever metaphor. It made something vast and terrifying seem a little smaller. But it was never tame, never far. Churchill could command a war room with the strike of a sentence, yet still collapse into wordless melancholy for days. He could electrify a crowd, then sit in his pajamas long into the afternoon, unable to move from his chair. His staff would later recall how he sometimes dictated speeches from bed propped up by pillows, half consumed by silence. Sometimes he couldn't bring himself to read the newspaper. Sometimes he couldn't bring himself to shave, but no one saw that part. Not the public, not the admirers, not even fully his closest friends. Because that's what happens to men like Churchill, men who carry nations on their backs. They learn to compartmentalize, to bury feeling beneath function, to wear strength like armor, not because they're fearless, but because they're afraid that if they drop the act for even a moment, they won't be able to put it back on. And here's where the story folds toward us. You don't have to be Winston Churchill to know what it feels like to live with two lives inside one body. There's the life everyone sees, the competent man, the reliable one, the leader, the provider, the one who keeps it together even when everything else is coming apart. The man who makes the money, fixes the faucet, remembers the anniversary, handles the pressure. And then there's the life no one sees. The one who sits in the car a little too long before walking into the house. The one who feels numb more often than not. The one who wakes up tired, stays tired, and yet can't sleep. The one who loves his family but feels like a ghost among them. The one who sometimes looks in the mirror and thinks, "Is this it? Is this who I am now?" If that resonates, you're not broken, you're not weak, you're not alone. Winston Churchill, who shaped the fate of Europe, would write in his journals about days when simply existing felt like a burden. When his body worked, his mind spun, but some part of him felt underwater, detached, disengaged, waiting. He once told a friend that when the Black Dog came, it brought with it a kind of indifference. Not sorrow, not pain, just a slow gray fog. an emotional paralysis, a hollowness that made everything, even victory, feel distant. And here's the tragedy: no one talks about the more successful you become, the harder it is to confess this emptiness. Because the world doesn't want to hear that the strong man is tired, or sad, or unraveling. And so he learns to smile through it, to power through it, to drink through it, to stay busy, to bury it in productivity, distraction, achievement. Churchill did all of that. He painted, he read endlessly, he worked constantly, often sleeping only a few hours a night. It wasn't just duty, it was survival. Because to stop was to feel. And sometimes feeling was too dangerous. In a letter written to his wife during a dark stretch, Churchill once admitted, "I am not quite myself. Something heavy presses on me." Just 7 words, but they say so much. Something heavy presses on me. You may have never put it into words. You may not have called it depression. You may have never told anyone, not even your spouse. But you've felt it. That invisible weight. That strange ache that comes not with failure, but even sometimes after success. When the project is done, when the business is built, when the kids have grown, and still there's a heaviness. That's what Churchill lived with, what millions of men live with, and what we're only just beginning to name. So this first part of the story is not a call to action, it's just a quiet recognition. The lion who saved a nation had a sadness he could never quite defeat. And yet he kept showing up. And maybe that's where we begin too, not with answers, but with honesty. Not with a solution, but with a breath, a pause, a soft whisper, "Me too." You would think that after saving a nation, after becoming a living symbol of courage, there would be peace. But that's the strange thing about men like Churchill. After the war, when the bombs stopped falling and the skies were quiet again, something inside him began to break, not with noise but with silence. The world expected celebration. Churchill expected to feel something: relief, pride, satisfaction. Instead, the quiet unnerved him. The roar was gone. The urgency that once defined his days had vanished, and in its place was a strange stillness that felt more like loss than victory. He had won the war, but he had also lost the fight to stay in office, voted out just weeks after the Allied triumph. The man who stood against Hitler was now alone in his garden, pruning roses and listening to the sound of his own breath. It's easy to miss what this meant, because men like Churchill are built to endure the storm, not what comes after. And maybe so are many of us. Think about it. You power through the job. You raise the kids. You stay strong during the hard years. You become indispensable to everyone around you. And then, the noise fades. The kids grow up. The job shifts. The pressure lightens. And suddenly, you don't know who you are without the struggle. That's when the emptiness creeps in, not because life is bad, but because it has stopped demanding the kind of strength you've spent your entire life practicing. And when no one needs you in the same way anymore, who are you? Churchill wasn't built for peacetime. He said as much. He needed the weight of the world to feel purposeful. Without it, he drifted. That's not weakness, that's wiring. So many men are the same. When life gets quieter, it doesn't always feel like rest. Sometimes it feels like uselessness. The office no longer needs your opinion. Your children don't call as much. Your wife, though loving, has found her rhythm without you, always at the center. And so you start to wonder, am I still a man if no one relies on me the way they used to? It's a question that echoes through middle-aged hearts like footsteps in an empty hallway. Churchill tried to find his footing again. He threw himself back into painting. He wrote his memoirs. He smoked his cigars. He toured the world and gave grand speeches about democracy and history. And yet, those closest to him say the black dog returned often, lurking behind his eyes, weighing down his shoulders. Because even with the accolades, the titles, the medals, there remained that aching void. And the truth is, no amount of external recognition can quiet an internal ache. This is something many men discover too late, that while we were busy becoming strong for others, we forgot to build strength inside ourselves, the kind that isn't dependent on our usefulness or our performance or our role. There's a strange betrayal in this stage of life. The same world that praised you for being the man who never crumbled now doesn't know what to do with your sadness. Churchill drank more in his later years. He withdrew more. He still delivered speeches, but they lacked the fire of his wartime voice. Something had dimmed. He had given everything, and though history applauded, the man remained tired. And yet, here's where the light cracks through. He kept going. Even with the black dog curled at his feet, he kept writing, kept reading, kept loving his wife Clementine, kept trying. That is a quieter kind of courage, one no statue will ever capture. And maybe that's the real lesson. It's not about defeating the emptiness, it's about learning how to live with it, gently. To stop fighting yourself for feeling low. To stop expecting fireworks from a life that has become a slow, beautiful dusk. To stop measuring your worth by how loud the world still claps. You are allowed to slow down, to ache, to feel confused, to want something more or different or quieter. You are allowed to be the man who once roared, and now walks softly, because there is dignity in both. By the time Churchill entered his final years, the myth had long outgrown the man. To most of the world, he was immortalized the war hero, the bulldog, the savior of Britain. But those closest to him knew something more fragile, more complicated. In the quiet rooms of his home, Chartwell, he wandered between memories and silence. The fire would crackle, a cigar might burn in his hand, but sometimes his gaze would drift into nothing, a far-off place no one could follow. He was older now, slower. The war was decades behind him. The applause had faded, the speeches had stopped. But the black dog, it never really left. And here's the truth that history textbooks leave out. Even the men we worship struggle with doubt, with disconnection, with decay. Churchill feared irrelevance in his later years. He still attended Parliament, but more often he sat quietly, drifting into sleep mid-session. He once told a colleague, "I'm not of much use anymore." Imagine that Winston Churchill believing he had nothing left to offer. How many men listening now have thought the same? When your hands can no longer fix what they used to, when your thoughts don't move as quickly, when your strength begins to slip away, not all at once, but slowly, like the tide going out. And yet beneath the regret, beneath the silence, there was something more in Churchill, something still alive. He never fully gave up. Even in his final decline, he wrote. He read history. He painted the world as he saw it, each brushstroke, slow, deliberate aching. As if through color and texture, he could say what his soul could no longer name. This is important, because we often talk about decline as failure, as weakness, but what if it's neither? What if the slowing down, the emptying out, the moments of silence and stillness, what if those aren't a loss, but a transformation? What if life after the climax is not a fade, but a shift? You see, Churchill was never more human than in those final years. He had no war to fight, no crowds to dazzle. He simply was a man, aging, remembering, feeling. And maybe that's what many men need permission for, not to do more or prove more, but to simply be more, to stop running from the silence, to stop apologizing for exhaustion, To stop measuring your manhood in output or erections or unfinished dreams. To let go of the myth. Because the myth is heavy, but the man underneath, that's where the story truly begins. There's a line Churchill once wrote, hidden in a letter not meant for speeches or memoirs. It said, "To each the soul gives out its own signal." I have not always heard mine clearly, but I believe it was there nonetheless. That line, quiet, unsure, honest, reveals something we all need to hear. Even the greatest among us sometimes live in confusion. Even the loudest voices sometimes whisper in private. Even those who saved the world sometimes couldn't save themselves from a sadness they couldn't name. And yet, they kept walking. So maybe the lesson isn't about triumph. Maybe it's about tenderness. Not about slaying the dark dog once and for all, but learning how to live beside it without shame. You are not broken if you feel tired. You are not weak if desire has softened. You are not finished because your career has ended or your body has slowed. You are not less because you feel hollow sometimes. You are still here, and that matters. Your life is not measured by the volume of your voice, but by the depth of your presence, by the quiet courage it takes to sit with yourself when the crowds are gone and the roles are fading. That's the kind of strength Churchill had. And it's the kind of strength you have too, even if no one claps for it. So in this third and final part of the story, we don't offer a solution. We offer space. Space to feel. Space to grieve what's gone. And space to begin again, not as a hero, not as a provider, not as a legend, but simply as a man. A man who has seen things, survived things, felt things too deep for words, and who is still becoming. So maybe tonight, or sometime soon, you'll find yourself sitting in a quiet room like Churchill once did. Maybe the house is still, the phone's not ringing, the world doesn't need you the way it once did, and maybe that silence feels strange, heavy. But I want you to remember this. You're not the only one carrying that feeling. You're not the only man who's ever wondered what's left when the mission is over, when the armor's off, when the world grows quiet and looks away. And you are not alone. Even the great Winston Churchill, the man who rallied a nation, carried sadness, carried questions, carried a weight that no war medal could lift. But he kept showing up, quietly, imperfectly, still alive. So take this moment gently. No rush, no pressure to fix anything. Just take a breath. Let it be enough for now that you are here and still becoming. If this story touched something in you, if it gave language to a feeling you've been carrying in silence, I invite you to let us know. Leave a comment. Your words might be the hand someone else needs to hold. And if you'd like more stories like this, true, quiet, and honest, I hope you'll subscribe to the channel. That way, the next time the dark dog shows up, you'll have a place to come, a voice to sit with, a reminder that you're still a man worth listening to. Thank you for being here. Until next time, take care of yourself. Gently, always.